Almost all children will be back behind their desks by the end of the month, but are there actually enough teaching days left to prepare for the exams scheduled for the end of the year? Britain has just been through a traumatic period as marks were revised several times, leaving school leavers in particular with an unclear future. So is the rest of 2020 a challenge or an opportunity? Education expert Professor Mary Metcalfe joins us now. Professor Metcalfe, good evening to you. What are you expecting the rest of the academic year to be like for learners? Obviously, we've never been in this space before.
Yeah, Stephen, we haven't been in this place, and I think we need to adjust our expectations. For the grade 12s, they have had more time at school together with the grade 7s than any other grade, and the DBE has accommodated the loss of time by pushing out the writing of the exams until later in the year. But grade 12s need support from family, from community, from the country. For grades 1 to 11, I think that we need to stop thinking that we're going to rush through the curriculum for this year. That would be unproductive, it would be stressful, and it will not increase learning. Children can only be assessed on what they've been taught. So what will be taught for the grades that have been at school for such a small part of the year will be less than previous years. And the DBE has both trimmed the curriculum and adjusted, and is advising teachers correctly that they will need to catch up the content over the next few years. So 2020 catch up, which is not the right term to use, will extend into 21 and 22, with teachers making professional decisions about what learners need and what can be taught in the available time. We do not want to stress learners at this time. I would really argue that schools need to be safe spaces that address the real psychosocial needs of children at this time and get them back into the routines. Basil Manuel has just been, played his voice, saying that there's such big adjustments to only being at school half of the week. Kids need support.
It might be easier for a child in, say, grade 2 or grade 3 to catch up over the next 4 or 5 years. You can make changes to the curriculum. But if you're a child in grade 11, or a teenager in grade 11, you've only got 1 year left to catch up. I mean, you actually start to run out of space for the grade 11s as well.
Yeah. Grade 11s are going to be in a huge amount of stress because they've got to catch up what they've missed this year, and next year is going to have to catch them, support them, and possibly, I would argue, continue deferment of the exams later in the year next year. If you're in grade 9, you're going to be anxious about how do you make your subject choices when you haven't been at school and you're not confident. If you're in grade 8, you've just begun to settle into high school. You're just beginning to make new friends, and all of that is going to have to be reworked through. Grade 4s have just started learning, probably in many schools in the country, in a language other than their home language. There's adjustments for all learners, and I think it's important that schools provide a safe and caring place that prioritizes learning but doesn't contribute to further stress, and that teachers as professionals are planning their teaching not only for this year but the next year and the year after.
One education expert made a comment earlier today saying that teachers should be teaching the learner, not the curriculum. In other words, they should be accounting for where the learner is. Do you think it's possible for our teachers to do that?
I do believe that it is. I think that teachers, well, firstly, my sense of where teachers are today is that many teachers, if their schools are ready and if the equipment and everything is in place and the systems, are keen to be teaching again. When teachers are teaching, they are in touch with the minds of all of the children in the class. They are constantly adjusting as a professional way of life what they do relative to what learners need. Generally for teachers, it's a complex juggling act about how do I take as many learners with me as possible in terms of the amount of content I have to cover. That's something that every teacher grapples with. It doesn't change now. Teachers cannot teach if that learners don't have the basic concepts for that lesson, if they don't have the prior knowledge. So teachers are used to this. What's changed is the prescribed amount that they need to be able to teach.
You talk about how we will have to make changes to the curriculum next year to help adjust, to help catch up for all learners. And yet the academic year next year is only going to start, I think, on the 25th of January. Now, I could imagine some parents who might say, well, actually, look, let's get them all back on the 5th of January and let's, by the end of next year, be completely caught up. I would imagine other people who would say, look, after 2020, the whole country needs a long holiday, including children.
Yeah, it's more than that. If the matric markers are going to be marking in January, they also need a break, and there's concerns being expressed that they won't have long enough a break, because the intensive period of marking the matric exams follows the writing of the exams and precedes the start of the next year. So I would encourage parents who are anxious about starting earlier in 2021 to accept that nobody anticipated COVID. Throughout the world, it's caused real challenges in education. Let's give our teachers a decent break in December, including the matric markers, and let's support teachers and schools to do as much constructive teaching where learners are at, addressing their teaching plans on the basis of understanding what learners have learnt and haven't learnt. We will get it right. It will take 1 or 2 years to cover what we had expected to cover, but teachers need to prioritize foundational concepts, clarity of understanding, and taking in as many learners with them as possible.
We know that every year, I mean, depending on which numbers you look at, if you look at the number of children who start in grade 1 and 12 years later, 13 years later, how many of them are in matric, we sometimes lose as many as half. I mean, it's an incredible figure. Do you think 2020 is going to see that figure actually increase? We're going to have lost more children from the education system for good?
So the figure of a half is how many actually pass in the end, but we have a massive dropout rate. And one of my ambitions for 2020 was that we should really be pushing a zero dropout campaign for this year. And of course, COVID happened. And I think COVID is going to make it worse. I'm concerned about the number of principals that I speak to who say that they've actually lost touch with a large number of learners, as many as 20% in some schools. Because as Basil Manuel was saying, it's not always easy, particularly in rural areas and particularly in urban areas where children travel at great distances to reach urban schools from communities other than where the school is situated, is that contact with parents has been difficult. It therefore means that we're going to have to work really hard as communities, as schools, as the country, to make sure that all of the children that haven't been at school for so long come back and are fully engaged with the learning program.
Professor Mary Metcalfe, thank you very much indeed. Really do appreciate it. Professor in Education, Professor Mary Metcalfe there.